get a job. It's an amazing one. I'm the boss, but I fall in love with a worker there. He's the love of my life, I'm telling you. Well, a couple weeks down the line, I start to learn some secrets about this man I thought was somebody else. And it turns out he's not really the person I thought he was. And then a couple months later, something absolutely devastating happens. It involves him, another girl from my work, and my workplace's HR department. This is a wild one. The one who promised to be my support system barely 3 months ago has just made me lose my job. And worse still, he called me a name, and I'm a 55-year-old who used to be sales executive at a top-growing firm here in the United States. Let me explain just a bit more. I come from a pretty rich family. It's a good background, and I had no issues at all accessing the things I needed and wanted in life. I got pregnant in my final year of college, and the responsible refused to take responsibility. I took it a while in my final year of college, and though it was supposed to be one of the most embarrassing moments in my life, my parents, who I expected to kick me out of their lives, well, they did the exact opposite. They knew that I fell prey to youthful exuberance and did not want my life to end because of it. I went on to graduate like the rest of my classmates, but while we had all our certificates in one hand, I had my daughter, Mel. I decided after college to get a job outside the states where my parents lived, and I appreciated them for all that they did, but I didn't want any of my future success to be attributed to my wealth and influence of my parents. My parents, well, were very uncomfortable with me moving. I had just had the pregnancy episode, and they felt I could make another mistake, but I proved them wrong. Though I had some guys come around me, I had enough sense to know that they're coming for something unserious, so it was always a no from me. I've had learned my lesson from the first experience, and I decided not to let myself be taken for a ride. Whatever concerned intimate relationships with men, it was of no concern to me. I focused on my job and simply raising my daughter, and this was the major reason why I rose to higher heights at different points in my career. It got to a point where I was sent off to manage a branch of the company elsewhere, and this promotion came with its own packages. I had an official house, an official car, and an increased salary. I was obviously excited about the new milestone in my job, but I never knew that it would lead to several dramas in my life. I got to the branch office where I was supposed to head, and there I began getting acquainted with those whom I would be leading. As expected, most of the staff wanted to get close to me, but two people stood out. Eunice, who was my secretary, and Alfred, who was one of the sales agents. I had come to the office to make a change, so I did not see it as a big deal to get friendly with my staff. I needed to map out strategies that would enhance our productivity, so this made me stay back later after my staff had left the office, well, at least most of them. Alfred observed my routine and began staying back to either keep me company or give his opinions. Alfred soon began giving more than just his opinion. He began creating certain emotions in me that had been buried for a long time. I thought my walls of, quote, no emotional connection to any man were a bit too high, but Alfred certainly climbed them. We began dating, secretly. Eunice observed a certain kind of closeness between the both of us, and she approached me to give me some advice. She claimed she was trying to save me some future headaches by letting me know Alfred never did anything, and that included getting close to someone if there was no ulterior motive. According to her, Alfred has always only cared for himself. I did not tell Eunice that Alfred and I were dating. I thanked her for the advice and told her that she was just Alfred's staff trying to help his new boss settle in comfortably. I noted that, well, I would look out for future signs just in case Alfred was a snake who was masquerading. I began looking for signs, but I found none. In fact, the more I looked, the more he gave me reason to love him all the more, and the more I doubted and discarded Eunice's warnings. Dating my staff simply meant I was mixing business with pleasure, and it never ends well. The chemistry between Alfred and me seemed to grow with each passing day, and he soon asked me to be his wife. I was overjoyed by Alfred's proposal, but I felt skeptical as everything was happening a bit too fast. I told Alfred that I could not marry him? At least not yet. My reason was simply because I felt that even though we had great chemistry between us, we did not know ourselves well enough, and Alfred was not willing to back down or lose me, as he put it. He said he did not need to know every single detail about me, as he was sure I was the one for him. Alfred was very convincing, and I opened up further to him. I told him about my teenage daughter, who had recently turned 17, and he said it meant nothing to him as he was willing to take, her on as his own child. Alfred came over to the house and he met Mel, who was about to leave for college. I asked Mel how she felt about having Alfred as a stepfather, and she said that she was not sure that he would make a good partner for me. She, however, noted that she was not going to interfere with my happiness, and if I was sure Alfred was the one, that I should go ahead and go for it. I was not sure Alfred was the one, but he was way up in my head, you know. It's been a long time since I've ever felt that way, the way I did, and I did not want the only guy who ever seemed genuine to pass by, so I accepted his proposal. The next step was making the announcement to the folks at the office that we were engaged to be married. We made the announcement, and though my staff congratulated us, I knew most of them had reservations about our union. One of such people, Eunice, she could not hold her emotions for long, and she soon found out that, her way into my office, and I quote, "He was gotten to ya," were the first words that she said without minding the fact that I was her boss. I reacted by cautioning her, and she apologized. She noted she was sorry for how she reached out like that, but she was only trying to prevent me from having a disastrous future with Alfred. I was about to stop Eunice right there. Come on. But she went ahead to ask me a rhetorical question about why someone who was 10 years younger than me. Yeah, I left that part out about Alfred being my junior by a decade, and had a daughter who was about 14 years old would eagerly want to be married to me within just a few months of knowing me to be his boss. I was already prepared to dismiss everything she was saying, but the mention of Alfred's 14-year-old daughter threw me off balance. There had never been a mention by Alfred of a daughter somewhere. If Eunice's allegations were to be true, then it meant that I was getting married to a guy who I barely knew. I asked Eunice if she was certain about what she was saying, and she delved deeper to make accusations. She claimed she was 100% sure that she said what she said, as Alfred had tried several times in the past to get into her pants. You see, the thing that I heard Eunice say broke me, but I did not let them affect my continence. Alfred and I kept receiving congratulatory messages throughout the day, but the moment my staff left the office, I quickly called him in. He came in all smiles while saying that he could barely wait for us to be married, but his countenance immediately changed the moment I told him no marriage was going to happen. Alfred asked what the issue was, like he was innocent. I went on to tell him that I could not get married to a liar who could hide something as important as the identity of his daughter. Alfred knew immediately that Eunice had divulged the existence of his daughter to me. I asked him to leave the office and never show up again. Yeah, I could do that since, I am his boss. He said amidst the tears streaming down his face that I was acting hastily without hearing him out. He pleaded that I just let him explain himself to me and that he would settle with whatever decision I took afterwards. So, I gave him 5 minutes of my time, and that was all I needed to turn my head towards him again. He began telling me his sad story about how he had gotten married in his early years when he barely knew what he wanted, the marriage which produced a daughter. He ended miserably with him losing custody of his only child. It left with an emotional wound that took absolute years to heal. He had decided after to stay away from marriage until he crossed paths with me. Alfred said the only reason that he had kept his daughter's existence a secret from me was because he was not sure I would want to get married to him if I knew about it. And he could, quote, not afford to lose the one person his heart has ever aligned with. His excuse immediately melted my anger, and I felt pity for the way I'd reacted without hearing his side of the story. I consoled him and assured him that it mattered little if he had 10,000 kids, as I wasn't looking for any more kids at that point in my life. Besides, His daughter was living with her mother, and he would move into the official house with me and my daughter once we get married, so there's no way that she would even be an issue. What I did not know was that the way his heart aligned with mine, it was amazing. His genitals equally aligned with every lady that came across his path. Pathetic. Alfred did not stop there. He went on to tell me that the major reason Eunice was pained by our union was because she had unsuccessfully tried in the past to seduce him and to getting married to her. Looking back now, it's funny how they both accused each other of the same thing. And judging from what I know now, I can tell who was right. We both decided to move on with the wedding, and I called Eunice the next day and told her in a very authoritative manner that the fact that things did not work out between her and Alfred the way she planned did not mean she was to badmouth him. I told her that we would be getting married, and she was to talk to about him from then on with respect, and he was going to be her boss's husband. Alfred and I got married, and my family was present. He marveled at how wealthy they were, and he did not stop speaking about it. He even implied that my success was tied to the wealth and influence of my family. We returned to the office afterwards, and the staff at the office, including Eunice, accorded him a bit of respect. His friends there called him the boss's boss, and I could see how his ego and pride swelled. It made me happy that my man was happy. But Alfred began taking the whole thing a bit too far, you see. I made an observation. Anyone with eyes could clearly see the same thing. My husband got unserious about his job. He acted like he was doing the company a favor by being called their staff. From the first day we resumed work after marriage, we both drove to the office as a couple. But my husband now preferred to come later, and he came really late. He could waltz in and out of the office without giving an account to anyone, and this was just something he's never done while we were unmarried. He respected me as his boss and was committed to his duties. It was clear that he was taking serious advantage of me. Alfred's productivity began to drop drastically. He was supposed to be a salesman, but ever since we were lawfully married, he had not made a single sale. It was that bad. If it were someone else, they would have been fired without a second thought. But this was my newlywed husband we're talking about, and I tried turning a blind eye to his stupidity. However, the more I tried ignoring his attitude and hoping that he would just straighten up, the more he continued taking me for granted. And the clearer it was that I was being very partial, so I decided I was going to confront him because this was not the guy whom I married. Alfred left the office very early that day, and I decided to talk with him. And after I got home later in the evening, I discovered he wasn't there. I waited patiently for his return, and as I was determined to iron things out with him. He finally came home and wanted to go straight to bed, and that's how bad things have gotten so soon. If it were before, he would be all over me, so I just asked for a few minutes of his time, and he grudgingly gave it. I pointed out his recent attitude, which negatively affected not just my image, but the productivity of the company. Alfred apologized to me after I was done, and he then proceeded to tell me that right after our marriage, he said to himself that he would not live in the official house or enjoy other privileges that came with my position for the rest of our lives, and so he had thought it best to build our own home. He noted that it was the reason his performance had dropped ever since. Well, I was impressed by his excuse. I mean, it was a worthy one. I asked how far he's gotten with the building project, and he said he was still in the planning phase and had been making plans to talk with me at a later date, as regards to the project cost. But since we're at it, it's best that we discussed it now. It didn't make any sense that my husband had spent 3 months just making plans, but all the same, I overlooked it. He disclosed the total cost of the project, and I asked how much he was going to bring to the table. Alfred said he had nothing to contribute financially, and I was alarmed by that response. Ever since our marriage, and even before it, I've been the one spending. I was the one who covered the cost of our wedding, and I still run the affairs of the house with my own money without taking a dime from him. And it made no sense because I was certain that he earned a good amount of money. I mean, yeah, I know it. Alfred had an excuse, and it was that his daughter was becoming demanding and he still had to pay child support. I tried to be understanding and promised to seriously think about it before taking up a building project of that magnitude on my own. I, however, pleaded with him to try being present at the office while I gathered the money for the project. Before Alfred went to bed that night, he asked for some money so he could show up at the office the next day. It dawned on me that I married a waster, but there was nothing I could really do. I was summoned to the headquarters yesterday, and well, I was told that my overall performance had not met expectations. I could not argue. The recordings were there. My husband, who was my staff, had continued acting how he wanted, and I had to go soft on my other staff to avoid my hypocrisy and favoritism being very obvious. The result of my actions and inaction was a poor level of productivity. I was asked to clear out my desk with immediate effect as somebody else would be taking the position. That is what was going to happen. I was being fired. And it meant I would move out of the official house where I lived, although I was given a week to get an apartment. I gathered my staff and gave them the news, and though they sympathized with me, I believed most of them, especially Eunice, must have felt I deserved it. If I could turn back the hands of time, I would have listened to Eunice, as my husband has just made me lose my job. The worst part was that he wasn't even at the office when I disclosed this information to the staff. I got home tired and frustrated. I couldn't even think. I just went to bed, but I was awoken by Alfred's return, and the smell of alcohol was reeking. Plus, I could see some lipstick stains on his dress. Well, I had not asked where he's been all day. He had just began telling me some made-up excuse. He said that he had been at a friend's engagement party. I mean, what kind of engagement party is held on a weekday? Starts early in the morning and ends late into the night? Come on. I was not in the mood to talk with him as I was already repulsed by his presence, so I just told him that I had been fired and we had a week to move out of the house. You would expect Alfred, of all people, to sympathize, but he asked me in exclamation, how we're going to survive now that I'm fired? I was mad at his level of insensitivity and I just poured out my frustration on him. I had just lost my job because of him, and rather than console me, he was bothered that he would not get the extra cash from me, which he usually did. Alfred reacted to my burst of anger by calling me an old woman who was frustrated. He woke up this morning and guess where he went to work? A new manager who had no favorites was coming in, and he had suddenly sat up. Gosh, I wish I had listened to Eunice. Update number 1. My husband and I have just moved into a very expensive apartment, and it is not my doings. Alfred returned from work the day when I made my last update, and he apologized for his insensitivity and the fact that he had called me an old woman. I could tell if his apology was genuine, but what was I to do? I mean, I had to ignore it for my own peace of mind. He told me that the new manager had put everyone on their toes by placing them on a month's probation. They had all a target on their head, and whoever fell short could kiss his job goodbye. The way Alfred now took his job seriously made my pain unbearable. If I had acted the way this new manager acted, I might still have a job. Alfred said he was going to make up for the recent happenings by taking it upon himself to look for a nice apartment where we could stay. He came up later with a luxurious 4-bedroom apartment, and I thought it was very unnecessary. The only ones who would be living in the house were me, him, and my daughter, who was in college. I asked that he got a smaller option, and he insisted that the fact that I'd lost my job and did not mean I was to act like a pauper. He said it was going to be a thing of mockery when people learned that a one-time manager had moved from her nice apartment to something pitiable. Well, I knew he was doing it because he wanted to keep up the image that he's been projecting outside of himself. I was willing to let him have his way, but the shameless man, whom I call my husband, asked me to foot the bill. I just lost my job, and I had daughters who were in college, and Alfred was asking me to pay for the expensive apartment that he had found against my wishes. I clearly told him I could not do so, as I was living on savings I had accrued over the years. Having seen my firm resolve to not pay for the apartment, he asked that I borrow him the money from the savings that I had, which he would repay the moment he got his salary for the month. I'd known Alfred enough to not bank on him paying me back for the money, but I knew that we needed a place to stay and time was not on our side, so I gave him the money. Yesterday marked 3 days since we moved into the house, and my husband and I currently are not on speaking terms. He approached me yesterday to ask for child support money for his daughter, and this was the height of it. And I wasted no time telling him there was none available, not even in my savings. Alfred then suggested that I reach out to my family to borrow some money from them. This was against what I vowed when I was seeking independence from my parents as a young lady. So I just told him that I could not, as he said I was just being too full of myself. Well, according to him, what's the point of having a rich family if you can't get money from them? So I did not give in, and he has avoided me ever since. Update number 2. Alfred has purposely started becoming a thorn in my flesh, and I'm not saying this because of the malice between the both of us. I got a call from my siblings, and they informed me that Alfred had reached out to them to tell that we have both lost our jobs and we were in dire need of financial assistance. They wanted to check up on me to make sure the story was true. Well, I was shocked at the fact that Alfred was willing to lie about his job status just to siphon money from my siblings. I confirmed to them that I've lost my job. While Alfred was being put on probation, I, however, asked them not to send any money to either me nor my husband, as we would be fine. My siblings gave me a lifeline by saying I could always reach out if I ever felt the need. I cut the call. I felt disgusted by my husband's desperation, and I confronted him, and he said he confirmed he had reached out to my family on my behalf since I was too proud to do so. I did not argue, I just walked out on him, as I knew he was not getting any money from my family. It was the midst of all this that I received the news that my father just passed away. Alfred sympathized with the demise of my father. He said I should take comfort in the fact that my father had lived a fruitful life and equally see his death to an answer to our financial issues, as we were sure my father would have left me an inheritance that would keep us afloat for a while. Alfred is a self-centered, cold-hearted opportunist who only cares for himself. He began asking when the burial ceremony was going to be, and even encouraged me to travel 2 weeks ahead of time and stay till the will was read. The death of my father coincided with my daughter's holidays, so she came home, and we both went to the burial of my father, and after the burial ceremony, the will was read. The death of my father coincided with my daughter's holidays, so she came home, and we both went to the burial of my dad. After the burial ceremony, the will was read, and it turned out that I have gotten a trust fund set up by me by my late father. It had to do with several expensive buildings that were rented and leased out to people, and I was to be getting a total of $50,000 every month. This was way more than I've ever earned, and I would never have to work again in my life. The paperwork would take a few weeks, but me and my daughter traveled back yesterday. I got home and Alfred went straight to ask me what I inherited from Dad. I told him my father had left his property to my mother as he must have felt I was independent enough. I could see the look of disappointment on Alfred's face. I asked about his work and he said he was off probation. I remarked that that's a good thing, as we would have something to live off of. Alfred immediately told me to go and get a job because he was not going to use his hard-earned money to feed an old woman. He stormed out of the house, and I've been trying to process his words. This is the second time he's called me that word. Update number 3. There's a lot to be said, guys, and I don't know where to start. After my husband called me an old, well, you know what, I decided to take some days to think about what I would do. I told my daughter, who already suspected a rift between Alfred and me, that I was going to stay at a hotel for 3 days so I could properly think and decide what the decision would be. So I did spend 3 days at the hotel, and never once did Alfred call to ask where his wife was or how she was doing. I decided I was going to end the marriage. It doesn't even qualify as a marriage, it was pure emotional torture. I got home after my brief time alone, and I could not find my daughter. I tried her line, but it wasn't reachable. I asked Alfred, who did not look excited to see me, and He said he had no idea where she was. I knew that she had gone back to school, as her holidays were long way from being over. As she would have told me. I was relieved when my siblings called me from the family house to let me know that my daughter Mel was staying there. I was surprised at the development because it was not up to the week that we had left there. My heart skipped several beats when my siblings told me the reason my daughter had suddenly left my home. She did not just leave. She fled. Turns out that my husband, who was her stepfather, had made advances on her, which left her uncomfortable, as you can imagine. I spoke with my daughter, who confirmed the same story. I cut the call and waited impatiently for Alfred to return from work. I was ready to tear him to shreds, but I needed to hear his side of the story even though I knew my daughter was telling the truth. Alfred claimed my daughter had left the house in a shame after a failed attempt by her to get seduced. I knew those lines. It was what he said about Eunice, and I was sure it's what he said about anyone else who refused to spread their legs for him. I immediately asked Alfred to leave the house, and I believe I had the right to because he had paid for it with my money, which he never returned as he promised he would. Alfred refused. He rather threw me out of the house, and I spent the night at a hotel before traveling to meet with my family, with whom I'm currently staying. I'm currently filing a divorce, though. Update number 4. Guys, I'm tired of this Alfred drama, so it'll be my final update, as he's no longer a part of my life. After I prepared the divorce papers, I went to see Alfred to personally hand them to him. I discovered that he already replaced me with some younger lady. Alfred laughed at me and said he was supposed to be the one serving me the divorce papers, as he has done me a favor of getting married to him. He asked me which young man in his right senses would settle for something as old and worn out as me. He called me a thing. He went on to say he felt cheated because he was not taking anything out of the marriage since I was broke. He did not bother going through the papers. He just dumped it somewhere and said that he would meet me one day after the hearing. Then it finally came, and it was there that he discovered that I did not just file a divorce against him. I was suing him for kicking me out of the house that he rented with my money. I gave my testimony of how Alfred exploited me and made me lose my job in the process, and I produced receipt after receipt and the bank statements of my account which showed my transaction history. Alfred did not deny the fact that I've been the one spending time in the marriage. He couldn't, even if he wanted to, because I had the proof to back up the claim. He, however, told the judge that the money I claimed he borrowed from me was a lie. He said I'd given him the money to rent the house because I wanted to maintain the lie to everyone who knew me, that I was financially buoyant. I was not surprised at Alfred's lie, and the judge used his lie against him. He told Alfred he was wrong to have kicked me out of the house he claimed I gave him the money to pay for. The judge ruled that Alfred was to compensate me for getting kicked out, by repaying me twice the amount that I've given him to use in paying the rent. But that was not all. Oh no. He was also told that he was not going to get any percentage of the $50,000 that I received from the trust fund. Alfred looked so surprised at the mention of a trust fund that gave me a monthly income of $50,000. Alfred wanted to run mad in court. He protested that I'd hidden the trust fund from him, but his accusation did not hold water. It was actually all in the papers that was presented to him prior to this, and he had cared enough to read it. He would have known. He left the courtroom in shame, and I'm living in a newly rented space. I hope to buy my own house soon, as $50,000 every month is a lot. Let's just start off by saying $50,000 a month is so much money. I don't even know how you can get that much from a trust fund, but I do want to hear your perspective about this. It seemed to me like OP made the right decision towards the end of the story by not really telling her significant other about that money, because she realized this is not the person that I thought he was when we got married. But besides that, Eunice, shout out to Eunice in the comment section down below. She tried to tell OP, hey, I know this guy, you gotta trust me. But OP was caught up in love, and it was the first time that she's fallen in love in many, many years. Well, I want to hear what you guys think about this story. There was a lot of drama to it and so much was going on. But at the end of the day, OP gets away with everything, scot-free, and doesn't have to worry about that toxic other person in her life anymore. And, not to mention she's getting $50,000 a month. Like, what? Anyways, thank you for joining me today. My name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories every day. If you want to be a part of these drama stories, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace. And don't forget, it's cool to be kind.